quite grateful that wasn't more than 238 pages, if I'm honest. Hi, welcome back to Bookish Brummy. My name's Mel and I like to review books. So this video is my weekly update video where I do a short review of all of the books I've written in the last week. And this week is the first week of King Family February. So this month I'm dedicating myself to reading books that have been published by all the members of Stephen King's family, including Stephen King. So I got an idea of what books I'm going to read from people other than Stephen King, but I wasn't really sure of what I would read of Stephen King's, and I sort of just wanted to pick from my collection as I went along, rather than pigeonhole myself into specific ones. So I'm just going to put up on the screen now all the books I sort of anticipate I'm going to be reading from other members of Stephen King's family. So just put up on the screen now. Okay, and as I said, we're going to sort of pick up random Stephen King books as we go along, because I have to read like this entire bookcase. So the first shelf is already completed, but the second shelf and the shelf below is not quite completed. Like the second one is only partially completed and the bottom one is not completed at all. So what I did this week, I actually just went off on a total Stephen King tangent. I was really looking forward to getting stuck into some of his work, and I did sort of consider starting this off with King Sorrow by Joe Hill. But then I thought, do you know what, actually I really want to get started with the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, because this is on my list of things to do this year, is to read the Dark Tower series, because it's not a series that I've actually attempted before, and this is like the, as I understand it, this is like the foundational linchpin of the entire Stephen King universe apparently exists around the Dark Tower series. So I've heard people saying that in all the other standalone novels that Stephen King has written, that quite often they somehow feed back into this Dark Tower universe. So I'm obviously not entirely sure how that's happened yet, because I haven't read all of the Stephen King standalone novels, but I also haven't read the Dark Tower either. So obviously where you want to start is I'm going to have to start with the first one, which was The Gunslinger. Now I have read people saying that this is not their favourite book of the series, but I thought I would go in anyway, make my own mind up on what I think of this book, and I've got to be honest, I think this is my least favourite Stephen King I have ever read. So we'll just get into why in a minute. So this was published in 1982, and it's the first of what was originally 7 books in the Dark Tower series, but then an 8th one came out, so there's now 8 in the series. I think this is the smallest one at 238 pages, so it's not really that large, and honestly, it's not tiny text either, so it doesn't really take that long to read, which I was quite happy about. So this follows our character Roland of Gilead, and he is basically on a mission. So it seems almost like a Western fantasy, because it sort of starts off in the desert, and Roland is making his way through the desert, and he's trying to find a place called the Dark Tower. And in order to find the Dark Tower, he's on the trail of a man that he calls the Man in Black, and he never sees this man's face like while he's chasing him. So he basically just sees like this man's campfire, so he's sort of a little bit behind, so the next day he'll stumble across the remains of this man's campfire, so he'll know that he's like not too far away from this man, but he seems to be having trouble actually catching up with him. And on this mission through the desert, he obviously comes across other people, and obviously has the kind of issues that you'd expect if you're trying to go across a desert that's uninhabited, majoritively with no towns or anything, so there's no water, there's no food and things like that. So he has various things that he has to navigate through while he's going through this desert. Now what I did like about this book, I'll start with that, is I liked this sort of Western fantasy setting. I've never really read a Western novel before. I know I've obviously read some fantasy, but I haven't read a Western novel before. But I used to like watching Westerns on TV when I was a kid. So I actually kind of really liked that. I like the way that Roland is described, what he's sort of wearing, and I sort of liked the way that the landscape was described. But I think that's about where my only joy from this book came from. it sort of became apparent to me straight away as I started reading this book that it felt very, very disjointed. I sort of felt like I didn't really understand, other than the basic premise of Roland is on the trail of the man in black to find the Dark Tower. I didn't really fully understand what was going on. Now I did read in the foreword of this that Stephen King had actually edited these slightly from the original versions that came out in 1982. So this is a more modern copy where he's gone in and cut some of the fat out of the text and tried to make it a bit more understandable, because I think back at the time a lot of people were sort of saying, the first book is not great, but then once you get past the first book then it's really worth it because the rest of the series is absolutely fantastic. So I did know that, and I sort of kept that in my mind while I was reading this, but yeah, I did find that this was quite hard to get my head around. It was a bit confusing, felt disjointed, and if I'm honest, like some of the descriptions around things that were going on, like there's a certain point in this where he sort of bumps into what we think is a spirit and has some kind of communion with this spirit, and then there's another point where he's sort of talking about what the Dark Tower is, and then also in the conversation that he's having at one point with the man in black, it feels like, I don't know if this was written at a time when Stephen King was very heavily into drugs, but it felt like something that was written by somebody who was quite possibly on some kind of trip, and it felt like maybe you could only understand it if you were equally on a trip. I don't know, but I just felt like some of it was a little bit, it just wasn't the same quality as his normal work, which I'm really, really sorry to say, because obviously Stephen King is one of my favourite authors. So yeah, like, just to, I can't really go more into it without actually really telling you the bits of the story that made me think that, which would then like tell you what the story is, so I don't really want to do that. But I did, and then I just felt like it was like rambling as well at certain bits, and I did think to myself, to be honest, I was halfway through this book, and it is, as I said, it's only 238 pages, but at the halfway point I was like, I'm really, really glad that this is a small one, so I'm hoping that the style and the tone of it, I hope that it's really, really going to get better, because I actually own all of the books. I've got them in the background there, and I really want to be able to read this series, and I feel like I need to read it anyway, even if I don't like it, because of it being, as I said, so foundational to the overall Stephen King universe in which all of the other novels kind of live in, and obviously I really like those and I've been reading those, so it feels important to me that I sort of read this. So I've got to be honest, if this wasn't written by Stephen King and I had no other reason to read it because there was a series after it that I wanted to read, I would not have finished this book, if I'm honest. And I've never said that about a Stephen King book before. So it really, really, really wasn't up my street. I went on Goodreads and had a look on there, and there was plenty of people actually that did really like it, although there's quite a lot of people also saying the same kind of thing that I've said, that is, it's a bit disjointed and confusing, and the idea of what the Dark Tower represents seems a bit high schooly rather than, I don't know, something that I feel would come out of the mind of Stephen King, because I feel like Stephen King can write a really sophisticated story, and yeah, the way that the Dark Tower is described in here, I don't think it's really that sophisticated, if I'm honest. So yeah, I've got to be honest, this is probably the lowest I will ever rate a Stephen King book, but probably only going to rate this about 2.5. The only time I think that I would ever read this again is if I really, really enjoy the Dark Tower series and I decide that I want to do a reread of the whole thing, because there's probably details in here that foreshadow what's going to happen in the rest of the series, and I just don't see what those are yet because I haven't read the rest of the series. So you never know, I mean, I might change my impression of this book by the time I get to the end of the Dark Tower series, but yeah, at the moment, not really a fan. So with that being said, I did decide to take a risk and just plunge into the second one of the Dark Tower series, which is The Drawing of the Three. Now, as I say, this was a bit risky because I felt a little bit fatigued after reading the first one, The Gunslinger, because I was a bit confused, and I was a bit confused even about what a gunslinger actually is. Does it mean cowboy, or do they mean something else? Like, I was a bit unsure about that, but I thought, you know what, while my head is in this character Roland, I'm going to continue on and hope that this is going to be better, because obviously if this is not better, then I'm not really that inspired to carry on with the series, even though I would try, but I'd rather know this at the beginning of the year. So yeah, I thought we'll go straight into the second one. Now, this second one is a little bit longer. I mean, this is more around the 450 page mark. This was much better. I really enjoyed this one. I felt like I understood a little bit more about where the Roland character had come from. I understood a little bit more about what was actually happening, and there were several more characters introduced into this book that were with Roland constantly, and I thought that was better, because then there was sort of conversation going on almost constantly really in chapters, like with other people and Roland. Whereas I don't think that was necessarily always happening in the first book. I think in the first book we kind of sat with Roland in his head a lot of the time. But I just thought that the way that it was written was better. I thought the prose were better. I thought that, you know, the landscape that they were in was quite scary, to be honest, as well. So that was quite fun to read about. And they were on still on this journey, obviously, to find the Dark Tower. But I think that the drawing of the three kind of relates to something that Roland was told in the first book. So this is like kind of that prophecy, but it was interesting to see, like, because I think when I read it in the first book, the drawing of the three, I didn't really understand how that would be you know, executed, and then I actually really liked the way that Stephen King executed this. And there's one particular character in here who is called Odetta, and then she is basically she's two people in one almost. She has like two personalities. She's Detta and she's Odetta, and I think that the Detta character is just absolutely vile. Like, when you're reading about her, you actually want to stop reading because she annoys you so much. She's so awful. But then her character switches back to the Odetta character, who's a really, really lovely character, and you actually really, really like. So I thought that that was a really, really, really good character to have in this book. And I did feel that this book made me far more invested in Roland's journey, and, you know, how he was going to get to the Dark Tower and who would actually be with him throughout that journey. So yeah, definitely I would score this a lot better. This is like a 4.25, you know. I definitely would read this one again. You know, I mean, probably if I was going to read the series through, I'd probably start this book, to be honest. I think the first book is sort of slightly important because it does obviously introduce Roland as a character, but I'm still struggling to see exactly how that book feeds into the rest of this series. But as I said, when I get to the end of this series, which won't be in this month, it will be at the end of this year probably, or next year, and then I'll do a full review over the books and everything. But my initial thoughts are, no, I didn't like the first book, but I did really, really like the second book. So I do feel really inspired now to read the third book, which has an even bigger page count than this, but I'm not worried about that now, because I think if the story continues on this trajectory, then I'll be really happy about that. So that being said, I did have time to read another book, and I did very seriously consider picking up the third book. So I'll just put which the third book is on the screen now. Yeah, so that one is sitting at, I think it's around about 600 pages. The title of that is The Wastelands. Yeah, The Wastelands is sitting at just around about 600 pages, I think. So I could have probably read that in the time that I had. But then I thought, after this week, obviously, I'm going to pick up other books by other members of Stephen King's family, and I don't really know how much more solid Stephen King I would get to read in this month. So I decided that I wanted to pick up something else that wasn't the Dark Tower, something that could represent Stephen King's work, so that I've got a more rounded set of his work that I would have read in this month. So we've read two from the Dark Tower, and the intention is to read Sleeping Beauties, which he co-wrote with Owen King, who's his son. So there is a plan to read that one as well. So I thought maybe it would be really good if I picked up some of his short stories or novellas, because they always do really, really well in reviews and stuff. So I decided to pick up Different Seasons So this book was also published in 1982, in the same year as The Gunslinger, and my immediate thought is this got all the good stuff, and The Gunslinger I'm not so sure about. So this book was published with 4 of Stephen King's novellas in it. We have Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, which is a really popular film, which was released in, no, actually no, like I think it was in the 90s, like 90s that was released, and it starred Morgan Freeman in it, and I've seen that many times and had never actually read the novel. I didn't even know it was based on a novel until somebody had told me after I'd watched it for about the 3rd time. And that film has been one of Stephen King's most popular adaptions of his book. Like, that's been one of the most popular, I think, that I can think of. There's also The Green Mile that done really well, but I think Shawshank Redemption is really like, lots of people really like that film. So that was one of the reasons actually why I picked this book, because I thought, well, I really like that film, so actually I really want to go and read that novella. And I thought that the novella was really good, and I thought that it was, you know, it was quite a good match to the film. There wasn't really that much difference between the two, obviously. I mean, obviously the film is like over 2 hours long, I think, and you know, this book is just about a novella. It's on the big side for a novella, but it's like 40,000 words. So I think that was probably about 150 pages, so it didn't really take that long to read. So with the film being so long, I think they just fleshed out some areas of the characters, but nothing too dramatically different. Yeah, so I did really enjoy this. So for those of you who have never watched The Shawshank Redemption or never read The Shawshank Redemption, essentially it is about, I want to say like around about the 1950s, I think. I could be wrong, or it could be the 1960s, or it might even be 1940. But anyway, we're talking mid 20th century to early 20th century. We have a character called Andy Dufresne, and he is a really, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? He's a really prosperous banker. He does really well in his profession, but essentially he gets he gets put in prison for the murder of his wife and her lover, and he claims that he's innocent, but the jury don't believe him, and the circumstantial evidence around him does really look to be pointing at him to have committed the crime. And in the, you know, bits where he sort of said, well, actually, does this not prove that I didn't do it? Law enforcement didn't really want to look into that. I think that they were quite happy that they had caught somebody and had somebody on the hook for the murder, so they're quite happy to put Andy away. And then we're actually telling the story through Red's eyes. So Red is another inmate at Shawshank who meets Andy. So he was there before Andy actually gets into Shawshank. So he's basically telling Andy's story about how Andy arrived at Shawshank and how Andy left Shawshank. And it's a really great film. I can't really say much more than that because I don't want to give any spoilers for either the film or the book. So with that being said, I think I would rate it about a 4.5. I think I prefer the story as it's told by the film, but definitely I thought that the book was still a really good read, or the novella was a really good read, so I definitely give that a 4.5. The next story in this book is, well, they called it a novella. It's called Apt Pupil, but I sort of dispute that it's not really a novella. Because it's actually 73,000 words, and the upper limit for a novella is 40,000 words, so this is nearly double that, and this is about 250 pages. So yeah, I sort of dispute that it's a novella, but it wasn't published independently until much later on. It was published in this short story collection. So there is also a film for Apt Pupil as well. Again, that was released I think somewhere around in the 90s. And I have not yet watched it. However, I have ordered this film off eBay, so I want to watch this film too, so I can do a comparison to the book, so I can let you know a bit more about that later on in the month when I've watched the film. But I didn't know anything about Apt Pupil when I went into it, and I thought like the opening was absolutely fantastic, and I was really pulled into this story. I think I was about 15 pages into this story when I went to see if there was a film for it, and then ordered it straight away. because I was like, this, you know, I thought it was a bit of a page turner, if I'm honest. It's a very, very dark story, but it was really, really interesting to me, and I just wanted to get through this because I was like, I really want to see where this is going and how all of this resolved. So I'll just give you the starting. So basically it starts with this 13-year-old boy who's called Todd Bowden, and you think he's delivering a paper to a random stranger's door, and he's not. He's knocking on this door, and it's an elderly man who answers the door, who calls himself Mr. Denker. And, like, you know, Mr. Denker's like a little bit rude to Todd, and then Todd says, no, you're Kurt Dusander. And the guy's like, no, that's not my name. And he's like, yes, you are. And then he starts to tell the guy which prison camp, like death camp, he had run in World War II for the Nazis. And, you know, Mr. Denker sort of realises, okay, this kid might know something about me. So Mr. Denker at this is like early to mid 70s at this point. So, you know, his appearance has changed a lot since obviously back in the 30s and 40s when he would have been committing these crimes. And, you know, he obviously is in a little bit of disbelief that a 13-year-old could possibly know who he is. So he lets Todd into his house, and then they start having a discussion. And that's what this story is basically about, is that Todd has this knowledge about Mr. Denker or Mr. Dusander, whatever you want to call it. And it's like, so what actually happens between them? What happens about this knowledge? And how does that affect Todd and Mr. Denker, really? And I just thought it was a really interesting story, because I think that the scenario that's kind of set, you know, it may have actually happened. Or it could happen, that, you know, somebody who is hiding in another country, who is basically a war criminal, you know, is hiding in plain sight of victims and of victims' families, and is going about his business around them, and they have absolutely no idea. So I thought, from a horror perspective, this was actually quite good, because it really taps into that kind of psychological horror, you know. And then obviously it's written from the point of view kind of a child as well, because obviously our kid Todd is 13 and I think he turns 14 in this book. So I really thought a lot of this story, I thought it was definitely very, very well written, so I definitely would give this a 5-star. And then the third story in this book is called The Body. So again, this, I would argue, is not quite a novella, because it's around about 48 to 50,000 words, so it just breaches that 40,000 limit, and it's about 200 pages of this book, and about a novella is about 150 pages roughly. However, again, I thought this was a really good story. I had never heard this story either. I didn't know the premise or anything that was happening with it when I started reading it, but apparently that has also been adapted into a film called Stand By Me, which I understand came out in the 80s. So I think the film for The Body may have been the first of the 3 films that I've mentioned today to come out. So I've also ordered that online as well. So I'm going to have a watch of that one as well. And then I think later this month we can have a video where I actually talk about the 3 films and how they relate to the 3 novellas in this book, because I think that's quite incredible actually, that 3 novellas out of the 4 that are in this book have all prompted to have a film be made of them. So I think that just also shows the good quality of the storytelling of the stories actually in this book that could happen. So The Body is a really, really interesting story. This is following 4 young boys who are all 13 years old. So again, it's set from a child's point of view, but this time we're telling it from Gordy LaChance. He is sort of writing a memoir as an adult about a situation that he went through when he was about 13 years old with his 3 other friends, who are Chris, Teddy and Vern. And they hear that there is a dead body near a train track several miles out of their town. So they decide that they're going to go and see it. So none of the adults are aware that this body is there. these kids hear that it's there, so they kind of go on this pilgrimage to try and see this body, but it's not like easy for them to get there. Like, they don't have a car, they can't really ride their bike there. So this story is like really quite horrific, really, because it's like, you know, 4 children going to visit the dead body of another child that adults don't even know is there, and we don't even know how that child potentially has died. But it's really more about the journey that they make and the relationships that they have with each other whilst they're on that journey. And, you know, you would call it a coming of age story. I think Stephen King writes really, really good coming of age stories, and this is no exception. I really did enjoy the characters, the 4 boys in this. And what I find interesting in the body as well is we actually set in Castle Rock, Maine, which is the same place where we see the book Needful Things, The Dark Half, Cujo and the Dead Zone set in as well. So there are some sort of crossovers between characters from the town and places that are mentioned. So that's also quite interesting in this story, I think. Now again, I would rate this story a 5-star. I really, really enjoyed it, and it's definitely one that I would read again. Now the 4th story is called The Breathing Method, and I would say that that one is technically a novella because that's only 25 to 26,000 words. Now I haven't actually read that one yet, I've still got that one to go, so at the moment I've like completed this book at about 87%, I've still got about 13% to go. So I can't give an overall rating to the different seasons book, and I will be finishing this story tonight, so I'm pretty sure, because it's only like about 80 pages, I think, this story, so I'll probably read that after I finish filming this video. But I'm really looking forward to it because the quality of stories in this book has been absolutely outstanding. I do hear people saying that Different Seasons is one of the best story collections that Stephen King has done, and I haven't really read that many. I think I've read Full Dark, No Stars, I think is one that I've read, which I thought was fairly decent, but this one absolutely blew it out of the water. Absolutely, and I really do recommend this. As I say, can't give an overall star rating yet, but I feel like it's on its way to a 5-star. I have absolute high hopes for this because I'm really, really enjoying it, and I definitely recommend it to Stephen King fans who have read a lot of his main books. I don't think you'd be disappointed in the shorter stories in here, but also if somebody's looking to get into Stephen King, I think this is a really accessible book to do it, especially with the fact that the first 3 stories have all been made into films, so there's a possibility that you may have actually watched that film, like one of those films, which I think sort of helps actually if you're going into an author that you've never read before. If you've like watched a film adaptation of something that they've done, I kind of like that. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with this. So considering that both of these books were published in the same year, and I have such a low opinion of this one and such a high opinion of this one, it's quite funny, really. You know, all I would say, if I go back to this one, I think that this is meant to be part of a much larger project, and, you know, it's probably not done so well for me because it's not really this short story here, it's actually a story that spans about this many books if you put them all together. So this is just trying to set stuff up a little bit, and it's probably just lost on me because I don't understand any of the foreshadow that's happening in this yet because I haven't read the rest of it. But yeah, so as I say, this week I've concentrated on Stephen King, and I've had a really, really fun 7 days reading through these, getting into the Dark Tower obviously, and sort of getting used to that world, which would be good because a lot of people absolutely love the Dark Tower series, so I hope that I love it too. But I'm happy about the fact that I finally started my journey into that. And then yeah, reading some of these novellas, and also finding out that there's the 2 films that I'd never heard of linked to the stories in this book. Really, really good. So as I said, I've ordered them, so I'll be looking forward to adding them to my Stephen King film collection and giving them a watch as well. So I think that this coming week now, I'm going to, as I say, finish the Different Seasons book, and then I'll be able to talk about that more comprehensively. I'm thinking about doing a video where I sort of talk about all 4 novels more comprehensively and how they sort of link into like Castle Rock, Maine, and to each other, and how some of the characters are mentioned between the different novels actually. So that would be quite interesting, I think. But I'm thinking about now moving on to the Owen King novel, which was The Curator. So just put that on screen now, because this one has actually really piqued my interest, and I've never read anything by Owen King before. So I think I'm going to give that a go, with the idea that I might then read King Sorrow next week. So I'd have a break, and then in the last week possibly read Sleeping Beauties by Owen and Stephen King. So I have a sort of break in Owen King's work by reading Joe Hill in the middle. So that's sort of like my kind of loose idea at the moment. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that I enjoy Owen King's work as much as Stephen's. So let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've read today and what you think of them. I'm especially interested in what you think about The Gunslinger. I was obviously a little bit disappointed in that, but I feel like I shouldn't be, because I do feel like a lot of reviews do kind of say like what I thought about it, you know, so it's not like I wasn't warned going into it. But yeah, let me know what you think about that. If you've liked this video, please press the like button, and if you'd like to see any of my future content, please press the subscribe button. My next video will be Thursday. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do for that video yet, but I think it's going to be somehow linked to the different seasons collection that I'm just in the process of reading now. Our next catch up on King Family February will be next Monday, so I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye!